Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we'll be learning today Mitzvah Hashem, Daf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn halachos Beis HaKnesses. We are still in this very complex Siman Kuf Nun Gimel. We pick up today 2 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch Ad Lamed Ches Amud Beis, Siman Kuf Nun Gimel Sif Yud Aleph. So we have been learning at length about the halachos of selling Beis HaKnesses, selling other dvarim shebekdusha like Sifrei Torah, etc., etc. And on a very high level, what we have seen is there are times when you're allowed to sell a Beis HaKnesses, and when you sell the Beis HaKnesses, what happens is the kedusha from the Beis HaKnesses goes on to the money that was received in exchange for the Beis HaKnesses, and there are times when those proceeds are encumbered by restrictions that we learned about earlier on in this siman, and there are times when they are not. So most notably, just as the most simple example, if a Beis HaKnesses is sold by the Zayin Tuvei Ir b'Maimen Anshe Ir in a small town, so then they sell the Beis HaKnesses, the kedusha comes off of the Beis HaKnesses itself, it lands on the money, and then the Shiva Tuvi Ir b'Maimed Anshe Ir are allowed to divest those proceeds of the kedusha, and the money could even be used for divrei chulin. Here in Sif Yud Aleph, what the Mechaber introduced to us is the idea that there are times when, even though on the surface nothing was received in exchange for the Beis HaKnesses, and therefore it would seem that there's no mechanism for the kedusha to come off of the Beis HaKnesses and to land on what was exchanged for the Beis HaKnesses. Still, there are times when that may be done. For example, the case that the Mechaber gave us at the beginning of Sif Aleph was, he said, what happens if you have a Beis HaKnesses that was demolished, and the demolition was done al pi halacha. So you had a shul, and the tzibur decided it was time to build a new shul. We learned at Siman Kuf Nun Beis that when you do that, you're not allowed to demolish the original shul until you complete the building of the new shul. So the tzibur went ahead, they built a new shul, and then, in accordance with halacha, they demolished the old shul. So now you have the rubble of the old shul. So this was a case that the Mechaber opened up Sif Yud Aleph. This is actually his second case. He says, Levenim ve'etzim mi Beis HaKnesses yashon shasasru. You have the bricks, you have the wooden beams of the old Beis HaKnesses. Said the Mechaber, you could go ahead and you could give those beams and those bricks to somebody or to an entity b'matana. You could give them as a gift. The chiddush is, you're giving these sticks and stones have kedusha, they're part of an original Beis HaKnesses. Now you're giving them to a group or to somebody b'matana. Where's the kedusha coming off of them? What's the kedusha landing on? So the Mechaber told us that you could do that because obviously if the tzibur is giving these eitzim va'avonim to somebody b'matana, it must be that either in the past they received some benefit from this individual, or they're expecting to receive some benefit from this individual in the future. And that's why they're giving him these sticks and stones. So you know what happens? The kedusha comes off of the Beis HaKnesses and it lands, so to speak, on that hana, either the hana that they already received from this individual or the hana that they'll receive in the future from this individual. The Mishnah Berurah said that there are those that say that this only works if this was done by the Zayin Tuvi Ir b'Maimen Anshe Ir. And the logic of that, we explained, is that if what the Mechaber is saying is that the kedusha comes off the Beis HaKnesses and it lands on that hana, often that hana is only a dvar chulin. So how is it that the kedusha of the sticks and stones of the Beis HaKnesses were able to be exchanged for a hana of chulin? That must be if the exchange is done by the Zayin Tuvi Ir b'Maimen Anshe Ir. So then it would be the same thing as the Zayin Tuvei Ir b'Maimen Anshe Ir selling a Beis HaKnesses, receiving money in exchange, and being moirid the kedusha of the money, and being moitzi the money to chulin. So too over here, they exchanged the Beis HaKnesses, and the Kedusha of the Beis HaKnesses came off, and it went on to a Hana of Chulin, because the Zayin Tuvir and Ma'amin Anshe are able to divest the Kedusha off the proceeds of the exchange. Now we pick up 2 lines from the bottom, a little bit past the middle of the line in the Shulchan Aruch Lamed Chesamid Beis, where the Mechaber says V'chein, and similarly, Yecholim lahachlifan ba'acherim v'hem yotzin l'chulin. Another thing that can be done with an old Beis HaKnesses. So you had an old Beis HaKnesses building. The Tzibur decided that this Beis HaKnesses building is no longer needed. So we said, if you're dealing with the Beis HaKnesses of a kfar, you're dealing with the Beis HaKnesses of a small town, you have a Beis HaKnesses that's no longer needed, we said that the Beis HaKnesses could be sold, right? And it depends how it's sold. If it's sold by the Anshe Ir alone, by the Zayin Tuvir Ir alone, by the Zayin Tuvir Ir by Ma'amin Anshe Ir, that will determine what can happen with the proceeds. But certainly we know that we have the precedent for an old Beis HaKnesses that's no longer needed to be sold. Now, says the Mechaber, you could also do a swap. You could swap the Beis HaKnesses building, the old Beis HaKnesses building, for another building, for a different building. Or you could swap the sticks and stones from the demolished old Beis HaKnesses. You could do a swap, and you could swap it out for other beams and bricks. And, says the Mechaber, Veheim yotzin l'chulin. And what you receive in exchange, the Kedusha could be divested from what you receive in exchange, and whatever you receive in exchange could be used for chulin. Again, if this is being done by Zayin Tuvir Ir b'Ma'amin Anshe Ir, it's very easy to explain how this works. We're doing an exchange. The Kedusha is coming off of the original Beis HaKnesses, or the original sticks and stones. It's landing on the replacement, and then they're divesting the replacement from its Kedusha. Okay. Says the Mechaber weiter. Aval oser lemashkenon oy laskiran. Just 1 second. 1 second. Bear with me for 1 second here. Yeah, okay. What I just said was inaccurate. My apologies. What I just said is inaccurate. And Baruch Hashem, the Rebbe Shalom gave me siyata d'shmaya, that after I said it, out of the corner of my eyes, I saw a biur halacha, and right away the words of the biur halacha struck me, and the biur halacha didn't seem to make sense. And then I realized, in hindsight, that what I just said is wholly inaccurate. So let's back up for a minute. The Mechaber said, "V'chein yecholim lahachlifan ba'acherim v'heim yotzim l'chulin." What the Mechaber means is that you could do a swap whereby you take the old Beis HaKnesses, or you take the old sticks and stones, and you could swap them out for different sticks and stones, or you could swap out the building for another building, Veheim yotzin l'chulin. And the original Beis HaKnesses, or the original sticks and stones, they go out to chulin. What you receive in exchange for the Beis HaKnesses, and what you receive in exchange for the sticks and stones, that is not yotzin l'chulin. Why? Because the Kedusha comes off the original Beis HaKnesses and it lands on what you exchanged it for. The Kedusha goes off the original sticks and stones and it lands on the sticks and stones that you exchanged it for. If you're going to want to divest the Kedusha off the swap, so if you're going to want to swap the original Beis HaKnesses for another building, and now you're going to want to take the Kedusha off that, I think you're going to have to sell that The Zayin Tuvi'ir b'maymin anshe'ir are going to have to sell the building that they received in exchange. Now it's a secondary kedusha, it's klisha kedusha sayu, and now you'll be able to divest those proceeds. But you cannot divest the original kedusha, the kedusha that was on the Beis HaKnesses, and it landed on an exchange. It would seem that you cannot do. You can't divest the exchange. So again, I'm correcting what I said originally. The way I learned this originally is I said that you could make a swap, so you could swap out the old Beis HaKnesses building for a new Beis HaKnesses building, and the new Beis HaKnesses, what you receive in exchange, the building that you receive in exchange is Yotzei L'Chulin. Or you could exchange the rubble, right? You did a demolition of an original Beis HaKnesses, you could swap out the rubble and exchange those sticks and stones for new sticks and stones, and the new sticks and stones could be used for chulin. That is inaccurate. The way to learn this mechaber is that you could do the swap, you could swap out the original Beis HaKnesses building for an exchange, and the original Beis HaKnesses building will be Yotzei L'Chulin. The reason the original Beis HaKnesses building will be Yotzei L'Chulin is because you swapped it out, and the Kedusha came off, and the Kedusha went on to the new building. What will be with the new building? So, okay, design to the year, but my ear will have to decide what to do with the new building. If they have a heter to sell the new building, and they sell the new building, so then the Kedusha will go on the money, and they could divest the money from its Kedusha. The same with the sticks and stones. Okay. Baruch Hashem, it's not the Siyata D'Shmaya for me, it's the Siyata D'Shmaya for this year. That the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted that I should, out of the corner of my eye, I should see Bir Halacha Dibra Maschel V'chein Yichelim La'achlifan Ba'acherim. And the Bir Halacha, the Chavetz Chaim, in that Bir Halacha is bothered by a kasha. The kasha that he's bothered with is that earlier on in this Siman, in Sif Dalid, the Mechaber brought down a very interesting question. The Mechaber wondered over there, we learned all the way in the beginning of the Siman, in Sif Beis, we learned that when you sell a Davar Shebekdusha and you receive something in exchange, you have to level up the proceeds. So on a very high level, if you take a Beis HaKnesses and you sell a Beis HaKnesses in a situation where you don't have the ability to divest the proceeds from their Kedusha. Let's say the sale was of a Beis HaKnesses in a small town, and it was only done by the Zayin Tuvi Yair alone, or it was done by the Anshe Yair alone. So in that case, you go all the way back to the beginning of this Siman, to Sif Beis, where the Mechaber said, B'nei ha'ir shemachru Beis HaKnesses, if the people of a town sold a shul, Yechayla likach b'dam of teva, they could level up the proceeds. They could buy a bima, they could buy an Aron Kodesh, they could buy a Sefer Torah. That's what the Mechaber said. That's the restrictions that go on the proceeds, unless, like we said, it's a case where, let's say it's a kvar, and you sold the Beis HaKnesses b'zayin tuvi ir b'ma'amin anshe ir, and you could divest the proceeds of their kedusha. That's a different story. But then in Sif Dalid, the Mechaber told us that there's a question. There's a machloikis hapaiskim. There's a machloikis when we say that if you sell a shul, you could only sell it if you're going to level up the kedusha of the proceeds. So you're going to take the money that you made from selling the Beis HaKnesses and you're going to buy a Sefer Torah. That would be a level up. That we saw in the Mechaber you could do. In Sif Dalid, the Mechaber brought down two shitas. Must you level up the kedusha, or could you keep the kedusha on the same level? Could you sell a Beis HaKnesses and use the proceeds to buy another Beis HaKnesses? So you're not leveling up, you're staying at the same level. So in Sif Dalid, the Mechaber brought down two shitas. He said, Yesh oisrim v'yesh matirim. Says the Chavetz Chaim, it's very odd that over here in Sif Yod Aleph, the Mechaber would say that you could do a swap on a Beis HaKnesses, where you could swap an old Beis HaKnesses building for a new building, and the Kedusha will go off the original one and go on the next one. In that case, it would seem that you're taking the Kedusha off the original Beis HaKnesses, but you're not leveling up. You're going equal. You're going from one Beis HaKnesses to another Beis HaKnesses. So the Chavetz Chaim wonders, why is it that in Sif Beis, the Mechaber would bring me down to Yesh Oisrim V'Yesh Matirim, and over here, the Mechaber doesn't. So, okay, you can see the answer in the Bir Halacha. But at first, I looked at this Biur Halacha, and the way I learned the Shulchan Aruch the first time, I looked at it and I said, hold it. What do you mean? The Mechaber just said that you could do a swap and the Kedusha comes off the original basic Knesset completely. Now he's asking me, wait, don't you have to level it up? Hold it. What's going on here? Then I realized I made a mistake when I learned the Mechaber. And what the Mechaber really means is you could do a swap, and what happens is the Kedusha goes off the original Beis HaKnesses and it lands on the new Beis HaKnesses. Now the Biur Halacha's question is very understandable. Why is the Mechaber telling me that I could take the Kedusha off the original Beis HaKnesses and simply let it land on another Beis HaKnesses and keep it at the same level? Why don't we say that there's a Yesh Eisrim that says that if you're going to take the Kedusha off the Beis HaKnesses, you have to level it up? Okay. Now we go to the bottom line here on Lamed Ches Amud Beis. Now the Mechaber is going to tell us what you're not allowed to do. Aval also lemashkenon, you're not allowed to use the old Beis HaKnesses or the sticks and stones. Aval also lemashkenon, you cannot use them as collateral for a loan. Now what the Mechaber means is you can't use it as collateral to secure a loan when the lender is actually going to take possession of the Beis HaKnesses building or of the sticks and stones and use them for a Dvar Chulin, kol zman the loan remains unpaid. So we're not talking about here as collateral to secure a loan like a mortgage. So let's say there's a tzibur that wants to build a shul and they take out a mortgage in order to build a shul. So in that case, the Beis HaKnesses is a mashkain, so to speak. The Beis HaKnesses is serving as collateral for the loan to secure the loan. That's different because the bank is not taking possession of the Beis HaKnesses and using it for chulin. The Beis HaKnesses is a Beis HaKnesses. Everybody's davening there every day. It's securing the loan, that in case the loan goes unpaid, yes, technically speaking, the lender could foreclose on the loan and take possession. But right now, he's not taking possession. The Mechaber is talking about a case where the lender is actually taking possession of the Beis HaKnesses, and he's going to use it for chulin. So let's say he's a lender, and you have this old Beis HaKnesses building, right? So now the lender is going to come and set up home in the old Beis HaKnesses building. He's going to live in the Beis HaKnesses building. Calls him on the loan is unpaid. That you can't do. So avalasa lemashkenon, oila haskiron, you can't rent out the old Beis HaKnesses building. Oila hashilon, you can't lend it out in order to be used for divrei chulin. Afilu al yedei shivat tuvi. This can't be done even al yedei the zayin tuvi b'mayim anshe yoyer. Why? Shadayin nisharin b'kedushasan. Because the kedusha hasn't come off the old Beis HaKnesses building. You didn't sell it, so the kedusha is still on the building. If the kedusha is still on the building, how could you have that the kedusha is still on the building and now somebody is using it for divrei chulin? There's nothing for the kedusha to go off the Beis HaKnesses and land on. So imagine this. Let's take a very simple case. Let's say you have the old Beis HaKnesses building, and somebody comes along and somebody says, you know what? I could make a very nice house in this old Beis HaKnesses building. I'll rent it out for $5,000 a month. I'll pay you $5,000 a month. Let me set up home in the old Beis HaKnesses building and let me live there. Okay, the kedusha is still on the old Beis HaKnesses building. Now, you might think for a minute, maybe the kedusha could come off the old Beis HaKnesses building and land on the proceeds, the rent that he's paying. The Mishnah Berurah is going to say, no, that can't work. The reason that doesn't work is because how could it land on the rent that's being paid? It can't land on the rent that's being paid because it's not an exchange. The shul still belongs to the tzibur that always owned the shul. It's the renter is paying for usage. He's not paying for the shul. He's not purchasing the shul. So the kedusha can't come off the shul building. So if the kedusha can't come off the shul building because it has nothing to land on, then how is it permissible for it to be used for divrei chulin because somebody is renting it? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Samach Tes, near the bottom of Lamed Ches Amud Beis. Lamashkenon oila haskiron, you cannot use it to secure a loan or to rent out. Because since the basic Knesset itself is not being sold, it still belongs to the original owners, and it still remains with its kedusha. Or to lend it out, pirish. When the Mechaber says that you can't lend out the shul, what he means is al zman, to lend it out to somebody to use for a certain amount of time, and then it will be returned as is. Or to lend out, let's say, the rubble of the original shul, and then the same sticks and stones will be returned as is. The ilu b'halva l'chalutin. If you're talking, let's say, about the sticks and stones, and you're talking about a permanent loan, what does that mean? That you're going to give these sticks and stones to the person who wants to borrow them, lending meaning that somebody comes along and says, look, I'm in the middle of building a house. I ran out of bricks. I'm 500 bricks short. Do me a favor. Lend me 500 of the old bricks of the old shul, and when I get my shipment of new bricks, I'll give you 500 new bricks in return. That's a different kind of loan. In that case, bevadai shari, that would be mutter, tahainu chalifin, because that's actually exchanging the old bricks of the old shul for new bricks. So in that case, you don't have a problem, because you're giving him the old bricks, the kedusha is going to come off the old bricks, and it's going to land on the new bricks that he gives you in return. That you could do, the same way you're allowed to do an exchange. What you're not allowed to do is, here, borrow my 500 bricks and give me back the same 500 bricks. In that case, the kedusha never went off the 500 bricks. How is he allowed to use it for chulin? You can't do this even zayin tuvi b'maymin anshe, because you have no means of taking the kedusha off of the old building or off of the old sticks and stones. There's nothing for it to land on. Even though the tzibur is receiving money, either they're now receiving funds in a loan because they're using the shul to secure the loan, or they're receiving rental income every month. You can't tell me that the kedusha is coming off the basic Knesset or the rubble and it's landing on the income, because the rubble or the basic Knesset building does not now belong to the lender or to the renter. So then it retains its original kedusha, and it turns out that the lender who's using the shul or the rubble or the renter is being mishtamish with kedusha. Says the Ramah, top line, Lamites Amad Aleph Hagah, v'dafka b'derech shemaridon mikdushasam. But this that you're not allowed to rent out the shul building, let's say, is only if the renter is going to be moirid from its kedusha. But certainly you could lend out a Sefer Torah in order for it to be lent from. Even if you're going to lend out a shul's Sefer Torah to a yachid, to an individual who maybe has a private minyan, still you're allowed to do that, because then the Sefer Torah is being used as a Sefer Torah. It was a Sefer Torah before, it is a Sefer Torah now. The only time you have a problem is you want to rent out a shul and somebody wants to live in it. So now you're being married to basic Knesset from its kedusha. That's a problem. Ois cut 9 gimel. When the borrower or the renter is going to use it for divrei chayil, ayin daled, but you could lend out a filu Sefer Torah, even a Sefer Torah you're allowed to lend out if it's going to be used as a Sefer Torah should be used. Certainly you could lend out a basic Knesset to another tzibur that wants to daven there. V'ayin b'Eilos Tamid, take a look at the Sefer Eilos Tamid, who says, that's only if you're lending out the Sefer Torah and the borrower or the renter is actually going to lend from it. V'chein mispal b'Beis HaKnesses ba'asara, or you're lending out a shul and the shul is going to be used by a tzibur, there's going to be a minyan. But if you have a basic Knesset that was used for a minyan, and now you're going to lend it out to an entity, and there are going to be 3 people who daven there, That's called being Moirid Kedusha. If you have a Sefer Torah that was being lent from on a steady basis, and now you're going to lend it to a basic Knesset who wants to have it sit in the Aron Kodesh so that when they open the Aron Kodesh it looks more impressive, that's being mezalzel in the Kedusha. Even though this is what the Elas HaTamid says, the Magen Avraham says it's not mashma that way from the Paiskim because the Paiskim don't make this distinction. Sif Yud Beis, very interesting halacha. Mi sheyesh lo t'nai im hakohol, somebody who has an agreement with the tzibur. Shelo yuchal livnoi beis hakneses ki imhu v'zaroi, that nobody has the right to build a shul for the tzibur in this town except for him and his descendants. So you have a builder in town, and the Kehillah gave over to this builder that it's his right, it's his schus, and the schus goes to his descendants, that they are the sole and official builders of the tzibur for the Beis HaKnesses. Okay. Says the Mechaber, Eino yochel limkar schusay la'acher. This person or his descendants may come along and say, hey, this is valuable. You know, it's a big schus to be the builder of the Beis HaKnesses. Now there's a young, new hotshot builder in town, and for him it would be a real feather in his cap if he could say that he's the official Beis HaKnesses builder for the tzibur, and maybe I could sell this right to him for $100,000. Says the Mechaber, you have no right to sell this zchus. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah, where we'll see some important qualifications. Says the Mishnah Berurah, "Iskat ayin hey live nice Beis HaKnesses for who adin b'shar dvar mitzvah." This goes not only on the zchus of building the Beis HaKnesses, it goes to any zchus, any dvar mitzvah that the tzibur went ahead and gave over to an individual and his descendants, that he has the right to this dvar mitzvah by the tzibur. Ayin vav, eina yachal imkar. He's not allowed to sell that right. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why? The mistabrid lo yishlitu akal al oisa mitzvah elo lo oisa ishu lazaroi. When the tzibur decided to bestow this right onto this individual and his descendants, they did it because they felt that it was appropriate to give it to him and his descendants. And what right did they give him? They gave him the right to be the builder. He doesn't want to be the builder, so fine, he's surrendering the right. He doesn't have the ability, he doesn't have the shlita to go sell it to somebody else. It belongs to the tzibur. The tzibur gave it to him. He doesn't want it anymore. Fine, it goes back to the tzibur. Now the tzibur will give it to somebody else that they think is appropriate. But it's not yours as an asset to sell. Very understandable. The mistarber lo yishlitu hakol oisim is lo yisish lazari v'lo limkar lacherim. They never gave him the right to sell this as an asset. They didn't give him ownership of this right. They gave him ownership of the right to build a shul, but they didn't give it to him as an asset that he could sell this right to somebody else. Unless the Tanai was made very clearly, that the Taka gave it to him as an asset, he could even sell it. Because of the Taz writes, the Taz says, realize that we're talking about a case where the tzibur bestowed this honor upon this individual and his descendants free of charge. It's like a kibud. They will mechabed him. You are the official and sole builder of the Beis HaKnesses. Avalim kana mehem bedamim. But if he went and he bought this right, so once upon a time he was a young hotshot builder. He wanted a feather in his cap. So he convinced the tzibur, I'll give you $250,000 and let me advertise I am the builder of shuls in the city of whatever. Okay, so then he bought an asset. So then says the Mishnah Berurah, says the Taz, then it's kechol kinyan dalma. Then it's like anything else that you buy. And now he could take and sell it. However, Baruhu, it is clear, but he could only sell it to somebody that it's appropriate for. He can't sell it to a plumber who's not a builder, and if he gets up to build, he's going to do a bum job. V'chein kasev el yarabah v'chein bedina de lavush. Kishehishu beferish. Even if they gave him specific permission, sheyachal limkar schusay, that he could sell it, hugamken dafka lahagun kamayu. It has to be somebody who's appropriate for the task. Sif Yud Gimel, says the Mechaber, 4 lines down, a little bit before the middle of the line. Gavu ma'ois lebinyan beis hakneses. If the tzibur collected money to build a beis hakneses, ubalahem dvar mitzvah. Now another dvar mitzvah came up that is going to require an appropriation of funds. So they went ahead and they collected money to go build a beis hakneses. Now, maybe there's a serious case of achnasas kala in town. Or maybe there's somebody in town who needs serious medical treatments. And now the tzibur needs $100,000 for something else. And somebody looks and says, we have $100,000 in the building fund. Are you allowed to divert that money from the building fund? So says the Mechaber, Gavu mois lebinyan beis hakneses ubalahem dvar mitzvah, moitziin bahamois. You could go ahead and you could divert that money to the other Dvar Mitzvah. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah's Kat Nayin Zayin, Dvar Mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Midasasam, from the fact that the Mechaber writes this in such a general way, mashma, the implication is Kol Dvar Mitzvah, that this would apply to any Dvar Mitzvah. Kitstaka, like there's a need for tzedakah. There's a family that's destitute, and we need to support them. The kayotze bazeh, or any other kind of mitzvah. Even though it's not a level up from using the money for building a Beis HaKnesses. Now, why is that significant? Explains the Mishnah Berurah, even though earlier in this Siman in Sif Hey, Pasak, the Mechaber Paskind, begavu mois, when the tzibur collects money to build a shul, de'ein mishanin el likdusha chamura. Oh, we got a problem. Earlier in Sif Hey, on Daf Lamed Hey Amid Aleph, the Mechaber said very clearly, Im gavu mois livdois beis hakneses, if you collected money to build a shul, oy beis hamedrash, oy likdois teva oy mitpakas HaSefer Torah, v'ratzu l'shanoisai, and now you want to change the designation of that money, from whatever you collected it for to something else. Sounds familiar, right? You collected money, now you want to use it for tzedakah. Said the Mechaber in Sif Hey, Ein mishanin ela mikducha kala l'chamura. You have to level up the money. You collected it to build a Beis HaKnesses. You want to change it now. You could go ahead and you could change it to buy a Sefer Torah. But to collect money for a shul and now you want to go use it for tzedakah? Can't do that. That's what the Mechaber said in Sif Hey. Now suddenly over here, the Mechaber is telling me, Gavu mois l'binyan beis hakneses, you collected money to build a shul, ubalahem dvar mitzvah, and another dvar mitzvah came, moitziin ba mois. You could use the money for something else. Stira, says the Mishnah Berurah. He says, V'afa gav de le'el b'Sif Hey, even though earlier in Sif Hey, Pasak, the Mechaber Paskind, begavu mois, when you collected money for a Beis HaKnesses, de'ein mishanin el l'kdusha chamura, that you could only change the designation and the usage of the money if you level it up. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you have to understand. Hacha, over here in Sif Yud Gimel, Mayri al yedei shiva tuvi yo'ir, b'maimed anshe yo'ir. Over here we're talking about not stam. The tzibur decided that they want to use the money for something else. This is done with the Zayin Tuve Yo'ir B'maimed Anshe Yo'ir. The Shari Loitzi Amois Afal Kedusha Kalav Afal Chulin. V'chanal B'Sif Zayin. Oh, Zayin Tuve Yo'ir B'maimed Anshe Yo'ir. We saw in the very complicated Sif Zayin that in a kvar they could sell a shul, they could take the proceeds and they could use it for a shul barbecue. So over there, what are you doing? You're taking money that actually was received in exchange for a Beis HaKnesses. So Mamashid, as the Kedusha of a Beis HaKnesses landed on this money, and we said you could, the Zayin Tuvi Ir, B'maimed Anshe Yo'ir, could divest it of the Kedusha. They could even use it l'chulin. So over here, in Sif Yud Gimel, when the Mechaber says if you collected money to build a Beis HaKnesses, you could go divert it, use it for tzedakah, even though you're not leveling the money up, you're leveling the money down. That's talking about when the Zion Tuvi Ir B'Maimin Anshe Ir, they went ahead, the board called a general membership meeting, and Lifta'am Ve'eda, they announced that we have a huge tzarech. There's this family in town that needs to be supported. We need to divert the money from the building fund, and we need to use it for tzedakah. So if the Zion Tuvi Ir B'Maimin Anshe Ir could even divest Beis HaKnesses money of its kedusha and use it for a shul barbecue, they could definitely use it for its tzedakah. Now, in the brackets over here, the Mishnah Berurah says he took this from the Magen Avram. Vataz, the Taz is a different way of answering this stira. Vataz Mukila, the Taz says that over here in Sif Yud Gimel, we're talking about Av Shaloi Al Yedei Shuva Tuvi Ir B'Maimin Anshe Ir. We're not talking about this being done B'Zayin Tuvi Ir B'Maimin Anshe Ir. So how are they allowed to level down the money? Says the Taz, no. Over here, we're talking about temporary. Elo Demairi, the Shkili Amois Derech Halva. Says the Taz over here in Sif Yud Gimel, the Mechaber doesn't mean that you could take the money from the building fund and use it for tzedakah. He means you could temporarily borrow the money from the building fund, use it for the crisis du jour, use it to support the family that needs to be supported, but definitely you have to put the money back into the building fund and use it for basic necessities. And in saying this, the Taz is going according to his reasoning earlier in the Siman and Sif Cotton Bays. The Svirle Sham by Sif Hey, Begavu Mois, in the case of where they collected money, the Mutalikach Derech Halva, that the Tzibur could temporarily borrow the money that was collected for building a basic necessity and they could use it for something else. Now let's go back to the Mechaber. So the Mechaber said, Gavu Mois will be the basic necessity, Balam Dar Mitzvah, Maitziam Bahamois. But, says the Mechaber, Kanu Avanim V'Kairos. Let's say they already took the money out of the bank from the building fund, and they bought bricks, and they bought beams. So now the Kedusha already went, when it was money, it was kinetic Kedusha. Theoretically, there was money that was prepared for the purchasing and the building of a building. But now you already bought bricks and you already bought beams. Now you already leveled up. Now the Kedusha went off the money and it went into actual building materials. Kanu avanim v'kairos. Then the Mechaber says, Lo yimkarum l'dvar mitzvah. Now you do not sell the bricks and the beams for a dvar mitzvah. Ela l'pidyon shvuyim. The only thing you could sell the bricks and the beams for is a pidyon shvuyim, to go ransom a Yiddish captive. Afal pi she'viu ha'avanim u'gedarum. And this is true even if you already took the stones and you already formed them. That was, nowadays we buy ready-made bricks. They would buy stones and then they would have to plane them and cut them to shape. So that's another level of preparation. Even if you already did that to the stones, there's a kairai, so you already brought the beams of Pesalum and you cut them to size and you sanded them. V'hiskinu ha'koil l'binyan beis haknesses, and everything is ready to build the shul. Moichrem ha'koil l'pidyon shvuyim belvad. You would sell everything, but only for pidyon shvuyim. Avalim banu v'gamru, but if they already built the shul and finished it, la yimkaru beis haknesses, you do not sell the shul building. Ela yigbu l'pidyon min hatzibur. You don't even sell the shul building for pidyon shvuyim. You raise the money for the tzibur. Now, let's see some important qualifications here in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, is cut ayin ches, lo yimkarum l'dvar mitzvah. If you already purchased the sticks and stones, you don't sell them for dvar mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, af al pi shal pidin, mutter al pi shiva tuvi ir b'maimin anshe ir, afilu lo'itzi l'chulin. Again, let's remember, the Zion Tuve Ir B'Maimin Anshe Ir could go ahead and they could sell an existing shul and they could take the proceeds and they could be mitzi the proceeds to chulin. So let's remember, over here you want to build a shul, you bought sticks and stones, we're talking about selling the sticks and stones for a dvar mitzvah. Says the Mechaber, no, you can't do that. Wait a second. The Zion Tuve Ir B'Maimin Anshe Ir could even sell it for the shul barbecue. They can't sell it for tzedakah. So says the Mishnah Berurah, very importantly, Af al pi shal pi adin mutter al pi shiva tuvi ir b'maimin anshe ir, afilu lo yitzi l'chulin, kol shkein l'dvar mitzvah, mikam mokaim lo yasukein. Nevertheless, says the Mechaber, really, this is not what should be done. really, you have sticks and stones ready to build a basic Knesset. Don't go ahead and sell them. Go back to the tzibur and raise new money for the Dvar Mitzvah. V'yigbu min ha-tzibur. If you built the shul and you finished it, dafka gomru. It's only when you actually finished the shul that now we say you don't sell the shul even for pinyin shvuyim. Avaloi gomru is a binyan, but if it's still a construction site, if you didn't finish it yet, dinoi kavana v'kairos. So then it still has the din of sticks and stones where you would sell it for pinyin shvuyim. Sheniskaru be kaidem. You don't sell a shul even for Pidyon Shvuyim. Again, says the Mishnah Berurah, very important, Pirush, Ein roi la'anshe ir lasis kain. It would not be proper for the tzibur to sell the completed shul for Pidyon Shvuyim. Aval min adin, shari b'Pidyon Shvuyim, v'likdusha chamura b'chal gavni. But min adin, you're always allowed to say, apidin, you're allowed to do it, especially if you're leveling up, v'afilu b'loi shivitu v'yer b'may min anshe ir. But it's not min aroi. It would be more proper to raise new money. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua for first Parnassah Shidduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the Bias called Tzedek B'mhera V'yameinu. Amen. Be well.